I recently got some AM3 CPUs and motherboards for free. Most of these are Phenom generation, so they're quite old CPUs now. But those CPUs, some of them can unlock even cores, so they'll unlock the better CPUs. I've been testing which ones do unlock, and in this video I'll be using the lower end ones which didn't with these OEM PCs. So I'll be installing an Athlon X2 dual-core, Athlon X4 quad-core and Phenom 2X4 quad-core CPUs in these three OEM PCs. All of these PCs were very dusty inside, and I took the motherboard out and I washed the motherboard and all the CPU heatsinks. I took the batteries out of the motherboards before washing them, and this computer has a 300 watt PSU, so this will be getting the highest specs of these three. This will be getting 8 gigs of RAM, Phenom 2X4 and an HD 7770 graphics card. This one has the lowest rated power supply, and it also uses DDR2 memory, so this will be getting the lowest specs of these three PCs. This will be getting the Athlon 2X2 and then an old HD 5670 graphics card. There would be really no sense in cleaning these cases completely, but I took most of the dust out anyway, and I washed all of these CPU heatsinks and all of these motherboards. The third PC is going to have an HP OEM motherboard and an eMachines case which originally had an Intel motherboard inside, but that motherboard was faulty. So here are the three CPUs ready for installation. I will put the exact CPU models down in the description. This one is the HP motherboard, which will go in the eMachines case. It will also have 8 gigs of RAM. It will have Athlon X4 and an HD 7750, so this will be in the middle specs wise. I have already swapped the thermal paste to new one for these HD 7770 and 7750 graphics cards, and I'll only need to do the same to this HD 5670. This lowest spec one with the Athlon 2X2 will have 4 gigs of DDR2 and 120 gigs SSD and 160 gig HDD. None of these cases have mounting holes for 2.5-inch drives, but since they're SSDs, they're very light, so they can just be attached anywhere on the case. These LED fans can be very easily used to improve the looks of these OEM PCs, which have this handy air intake in the side panel. I am installing very cheap 120mm RGB LED fans in 2 of these cases. I'm installing the RGB fans to the Acer cases and a green LED fan to the eMachines case with the HP motherboard, because this case has a large green LED at the front. This HP motherboard actually has a slot on the motherboard that says mini card, which looks like a Wi-Fi mini PCI Express, but that could also be using SATA instead of PCIe. But if that's PCIe, I'll probably install a Wi-Fi card in this PC later. I don't have the antennas right now. I usually take antennas from some old broken laptops. This eMachines case has an Acer side panel, which isn't a panel that was there originally, but it fits there somehow. And the eMachines case PC booted up okay into the BIOS, and next thing was to take all the stickers of the front panels of all the PCs, and after taking the stickers off, it's time to test each PC, and all of them go to the BIOS nicely, and Windows installed nicely on them. The Windows 7 keys worked for Windows 10 on the Acer machines, but this HP motherboard has probably had some older version installed, or then it's been deactivated or something, because that cannot get Windows 10 license. But anyway, they are available pretty cheap. I started performance testing from this lowest spec computer, and due to the graphics card being that old, it doesn't get the newest drivers and it doesn't get the screen recording utility, so I couldn't record any footage, but I can say that only Fall Guys worked playably at 45 FPS maybe, and that Phasmophobia surprisingly even run at 25 FPS, but that's not very playable. Next it was turn of the middle spec E-Machines case and HP motherboard build with Athlon 2X4. This PC is completely different class of performance than the previous one, and this can run Fall Guys with the default settings at 60 FPS. Phasmophobia runs around 60 or close to 60 FPS on low settings, and CSGO runs around 45 FPS average. I'd say that it's borderline playable. CSGO runs around 60 FPS at low or competitive settings, but CSGO being very FPS sensitive game, it can be unoptimal that there will be sometimes dips below 60, but at least with bots it was completely okay to play. Finally there's the other Acer PC with the Phenom 2X4 CPU, and this has the highest specs of these computers. Fall Guys runs very well at 60 FPS at default settings like the previous computer ran it also, and Phasmophobia runs at 60 FPS even at mid settings with bloom and such turned off. Fortnite runs at average 65 FPS maybe. It still regularly dips into the 50s and such, especially when there's a lot going on, but it is certainly playable, I'd say. CSGO runs at 80 FPS average in Inferno with bots and with lowest or competitive settings. So I'd say this is also very playable. There's some extra headroom so that the FPS doesn't dip below 60 so easily.